is that I spend a lot of my life in my real job planning programs, of training programs, doctoral programs, etc. And in Europe, perhaps here too, there is a kind of mafia hoping to control education from above. And I am obliged to organize the planning in terms of lists of competencies. It seems to me that if we can get process research that compares novices, beginner translators, with professionals, and here I'm dealing with translators and not interpreters, I must admit. If we can compare those two and find out what the difference is, then we will know what we have to train you in. The topic of this series is what's new in research. So I'll try to tell you very briefly what's out there on that specific problem. What have people found out about the difference between professionals and novices, or it's more to do with tendency. The more experience a translator has, the more what? Here we go. I'm going back to quite early research. Lösche would be the earliest research in this field in German. The more you use paraphrase and the less you use literalism. Okay, but actually that was observed years ago by Pröpfer, who observed primitive literalism in the way people start to translate and then they move on to more creative strategies. Early research again, the larger the translation units that are processed. That is, the larger the segments of text that people work on in order to make decisions that solve problems. No surprises, I hope, here. This might be a surprise to her, and this comes from more recent work. Jensen, Jacobsen, Engel, Dimitrova. Jacobsen and Jensen work on eye tracking. They follow where the translator is looking on the screen as they interact. Dimitrova is using think aloud protocols, that is, people talking while they're translating, explaining what they're doing. These are two methods that are used to investigate a process. This one I've tested myself, as you see in a while, and I just use simple screen recording. I get the students to record what they're doing while they translate, then they play that back, and they can analyze where they spend their time. The more experience, the longer the time spent reviewing work. Okay? And the fewer changes are made. This, for me, is key, because we don't really teach a lot of reviewing or revising. It's sort of there as a matter of course. But it appears here to be a very important part of what might be professionalization, the making of a professional. This is a simple experiment done with eye tracking again, just seeing where the eye is looking most when people translate. The more experienced, the faster texts are read. No surprise, you get good at reading texts and processing them. But the more time you look at the target text and the less on the source. People spend time going over the translation, thinking about the product and not the input. And this concords, of course, with what we just saw about the importance of revising and reviewing. Here it becomes more tenuous. I'll explain why I think I'll have time to do so. It's claimed that there's more top-down processing when people are more professional. That is, they think about the big problems. What is this text getting at? Whom is this a text addressed to? What is its purpose? And then I'm going to solve my problems on that basis, rather than a bottom-up strategy. Oh dear, that adjective is the complement of that, which is that, therefore I need the same adjectives here in my target text. Okay? This concords with what we just said about the translation units. The more professional, the bigger the translation units. Similarly here, Dickon and Condit, more encyclopedic knowledge, what you know about the real world, what you can find out, rather than spending your time trying to interpret the source text, which is probably badly written, and language is fundamentally ambiguous anyway, as my class discovered yesterday. The people working on Think Aloud protocols, these are the translators talking as they translate, find that the more experienced translators happen to have more to say. They can justify themselves, they express more principles and more personal theories. I feel that. Rather than the novices that tend to feel guilty and hide their doubts. Research by Künzli, more experienced translators incorporate the client or instructions from the client or thought about the needs of the client into the risk management process. This particularly concerns the solving of ambiguities in the text. Still, there's a lot of research here. I will add, in passing, that the subjects to research upon are very few in number. So these are just hypotheses. This is what people have discovered when doing this research on a few novices and fewer professionals. So there are things thrown out there to see if they hold. Okay? That's not the gospel truth. This is one that has been more difficult. It was assumed in the early work that the more experienced you become, the more routine tasks become automatic. That is, you do things without thinking about them. Like riding a bicycle. Remember when you learned to ride a bike and you kept falling off? You had to think about what to do? And now, of course, you get in a car. No, you get on your bike. Okay? And you don't fall off, but you don't have to think about it. Okay? Tasks become automated. It was assumed that things become more automatic. Okay? But the more recent research suggests that this is not the case. Routine tasks become automatic, but the solving of important problems, what I, in my own research, would identify as high-risk problems, we find that professionals spend more time on them than the non-professionals. That is, there's a redistribution of effort away from the low-risk, automatic, mundane tasks to the high-risk, problematic, problem-solving tasks. And I think this is the end. Künzli claims that the professionals display more realism, that is, they can accept a non-optimal solution, good enough within the available time constraints and the amount you're being paid. Confidence, which might be just what I said, and critical attitudes. They can be critical of the client's instructions and of the source text and still get through. Okay? So there are certain personal, attitudinal dispositions that are developed as one becomes a professional. Those things, by the way, do appear in the lists of competencies that I just looked at. The realism, confidence, critical attitudes. Okay? But when I go over this research, I find some aspects that are not really addressed, at least in what happens or used to happen in my programs. I won't talk about your training, but in my programs. Speed is very rarely addressed in the training process. And there's a lot of research on speed. I'm going to mention it in a minute. The redistribution of effort in terms of what's important, of what is high risk, is something that is not taught a lot. I know at the beginning when we have novice instructors, they tend to insist that a mistake is equally important no matter where it occurs in the text. But anyone who works with real-world text sort of knows that some bits are really important and others are very mundane. Documentation, the capacity to work with external sources, and what I mentioned, the key role of reviewing. In brackets, new technologies, although this is an area that is still under-researched within process studies.